Welcome to BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr, Ryan Snyder, and Sean Fitz here. Our recruiting show has been crazy good the last couple of weeks because there's been all kinds of information. Once again, we are here in the middle talking about what happened last weekend, all the implications of what Penn State found were their new Nittany Lions in the class of 2026 and beyond at Penn State Prospect Camp. And there's more coming up this weekend, plus official visits on the way. As you saw in the title, Andrew Olish, one of the top players left in Pennsylvania, is coming to campus this weekend for Penn State's official visit weekend. One of the few uncommitted players. So we're going to be talking about all of that today. But just going to get this out of the way to start the show. If you are not a part of BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, you got to be for this time of year. Code PSU1, 2 months for $1. It's the same code we've been using this whole time. If you haven't taken advantage of it yet, please consider joining us in the Lions Den message forum and on premium content. It will change your life. Let me tell you. And here's the thing. If you're like, money's tight, it's 2 months for $1. I feel for you. I was on the outside looking in. I was not a part of Blue White Illustrated, so I decided to work for them. And I know that Ryan, back in the day, that was your decision as well. You wanted recruiting information, so you started working in recruiting. Not everyone can do that, but we can give you 2 months for $1. So gentlemen, welcome to the show. And what's on your mind today? Ryan, I'll just start with you since we were talking.
Yeah, just sorting out 7-on-7 this weekend. Pretty big tournament. We're sorting out, see if there's any extra teams being added. Oh, wait. Maybe I should grab my mic. Sorry,
there
guys.
We go.
Yep. There we go. Sorry, guys. I'd have that off to the side. Yeah, like I said, sorting out 7-on-7 tomorrow. Some pretty good teams coming up. Lots of talent. Expect Harrisburg to be there. I think Penn State fans know, with Messiah Mickens now there, Kevin Brown, Elias Koch, a bunch of guys. That'll be fun to watch. Imhotep, a couple other teams will be there as well. So excited to see that tomorrow. And then let's see how, these official visits shake out. Obviously, it's commitment weekend. So 13 of the 14 commits will be here. That's big with 4 more uncommitted guys. So same routine as always, really, man. Camps and official visits and sorting it all out, seeing where things go.
Fitz, what's on your mind as we start the show today?
Oh, just going through these Pennsylvania rankings, brushing up on these fresh new industry rankings. But yeah, I think that's going to be the subject. We got official visitors coming in this weekend, and it's a different type of official visit weekend. It's when all the commits are here. As we mentioned on the show earlier this week, Penn State did not make it to this weekend with a couple of key targets, most notably Michael Carroll, the offensive lineman from Central Bucks East, who committed to Alabama after his official visit. So pick your poison on these weekends. There's advantages to coming in early. There's advantages to coming in late. Sometimes you got to take some guys at their word, and you're not going to make it to those official visits. So that's a tough break for Carroll. We talked a little bit about offensive tackle recruiting on the show earlier this week, and it's not the brightest picture. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, if you want to get that information, you can go check out our Tuesday show, or I believe it was a part of Fitz's recruiting recap, which you can check out Tuesday afternoons when that comes out on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Let's start today with the bidding of a non-Pennsylvania player, but a wide receiver, and that's a position everyone's interested to know more about. And we have our first decision day. I believe this is the first one coming up on the calendar. Corey Sims out of Missouri is going to make his decision between USC, Missouri, and Penn State. So, Fitz, I'll come back to you on this one. Preview this for us in the best way you know how about what to expect, what you think is going on with Corey Sims and his decision coming up at the end of the month.
Really enjoyed his Penn State visit. It was his second trip out to Penn State. He came in in January and then came back. Imagine that. But now you look at that top 3. He's a St. Louis kid, so Missouri has been prevalent in a lot of recruitments. Maybe Penn State fans obviously familiar with Matt Zollers, but they've been prevalent in a lot of recruitment. So I think you'd have to give the edge to Missouri here. He did go out and visit USC, like that as well. Great connection with Marcus Hagens. The recruiting staff has been on him for a while, and he's one of those outliers that would shock a lot of people if he went to Penn State. But you look at him, you look at Phillip Sims, guys that are out of the region that came in for official visits, really enjoyed it. Now it's about trying to figure out how you can mitigate that distance and get that down. So it would be a surprise for Penn State to land Corey Sims on June 30th, but at the same time, I think this shows they're right in it.
Ryan, coming to you on this particular conversation about Corey Sims, just I want to personally underscore, and I guess I'm just throwing you my opinion, there's a lot of good receivers. So how this goes, you don't ever want to lose out on a recruit you want, but there are a lot of really good receivers left on the board for Penn State. They've done a good job bringing in good football players. So if it's a saying is if it's a lean to Missouri, I guess what's the impact of that on the class?
Well, there's 17 days to go until June 30th, and I think there's a good chance that we can see like Cyrus' decision by then, Jeff Exner's decision by then, probably a few others. Taz Williams is coming in this weekend. We'll see where things go with that. Of course, he's from Pittsburgh, resides in Texas nowadays. So I think that's kind of where you start with that is let's see what the board looks like maybe on June 25th. And then I think it's a little easier to read that situation just because, Penn State's still going to push with Quincy Porter and some other guys as well. Of course, they already have Lyric Samuel on board. I've always thought 4 was probably the number for wide receiver. Of course, they would absolutely take a 5th if it's a player they can't pass up on though. So I would kind of leave with Sean. I mean, I think Missouri's like the safe pick, but like at the same time, Corey, if we're talking about like surprises, like Darius Dixon surprised me. If you would have told me this a week ago, right? I mean, Darius Dixon surprised me more than maybe a Corey Sims would. So definitely a really strong relationship there. One that's been going for a long time. Relationship with Beckham Kritza too. That only helps. But if I had to give my opinion today, I would kind of leave with Sean there with Missouri, but also USC. Man, I mean, they look at what they've been doing lately. Who knows if they really push for them. You can't really rule any of those 3 out. So it makes sense. Is he still going to go to Nebraska? I saw he was written that he was going to go to Nebraska still, but then why do you have a top 3?
Think they would be in his top 4 then, but
right?
No, I have no idea if he is. And that's the thing with receivers, and I think you hit on it pretty hard here. Is like we just talked about offensive tackles, and Michael Carroll's off the board, Zaire Addison's off the board, so you've only got one top target to go back to. You hopefully can find somebody.
Well, and Davenport's off the board too.
Yeah,
we thought. Yeah.
You can go down the board and find somebody eventually, but like at receiver, you're going to have guys go elsewhere, and I think they're going to be fine. Like I agree with Ryan that Cyrus and Exner remain the 2 obvious ones, but you could still sneak a surprise in there. But they hosted 11. Is it 11 official visitors for wide receivers this month? That's a pretty big net to cast. Penn State knows where they're at with wide receivers. They're not on the same level as the YouTube commentary and the message board commentary, but they know where they're at with wide receivers. And with Higgins being a relatively fresh face in that building, he gets a chance to sort of build up his own room. So that's why you're looking at kind of four receivers for this class.
We'll get to some of that and some of those conversations in just one second. But today's sponsor is My Perfect Franchise, longtime sponsor here on the BWI Live Recruiting Show. So if you want to check out Andy Ludicky and what he has to offer, call him at 404-973-9901. If you're watching here on the YouTube channel, you can see all his information, but I'll read it for you because that's what my job is. Andy at myperfectfranchise.net. And let me tell you what he is and what My Perfect Franchise does. Andy Ludicky is a franchise consultant with extensive experience placing people like you with the perfect franchise to manage. Do you have business experience? Do you have corporate experience? Do you know how to manage things? Or do you have expertise in a certain field that would help you translate all of your skills in that area into a management role that determines your future instead of making money for somebody else? Well, it's not easy. In fact, it's very hard, but Andy has done it. He's gone through the process. He's learned the ins and outs. He's made all the mistakes, and he's here to teach you all of that stuff. So he wants to get you in the right business to succeed, and that means talking you out of businesses maybe that aren't great or that aren't a good idea. He will go through that whole process with you. In fact, that's what he does. So give him a call, 404-973-9901. You can check him out at the Blue White Illustrated message board. Another great reason to be part of Blue White Illustrated on the Lions Den. And he's been running these fun contests where you guess a business, and if you are the first person to guess it right, you get a 3-month subscription. So it's all worth it. You can get in for $1, and then you can win the contest, and you get 3 more months. It's a win-win for you. So check him out, 404-973-9901 or Andy at myperfectfranchise.net. So let's get into the thing that I think people like to hear the most, and that's when you guys make predictions and then we get to see the results of those things. So a couple of the latest On3 RPM picks from both Ryan and from Fitz. We're going to go through those today and talk about those players. We mentioned a little bit of that here on the show, but these are the 2 that we haven't talked about on the show specifically since the last time around. So, Ryan, I want to come back to you. Who is the player you put in a pick for recently since the last time we talked?
Yeah, cornerback Josh Johnson out of Ironton, Ohio, 6'2", 175. Really good frame, and a player that, right now, I think if you look at the industry rankings, right, number 873 in the country, I think a lot of fans are kind of wondering, who is this guy, compared to Brandon Finney or Jameer Joseph, some of those guys that we've been talking about a little bit more. I think Josh is probably, if he ends up at Penn State, will probably end up being one of those guys who kind of starts towards the bottom as far as the rankings are concerned, and could absolutely move up as we continue to gather testing numbers and things like that. We know he did some kind of testing work with Penn State kind of recently, and it was, from everything we've gathered, really successful. So Penn State knows what he is as an athlete, and then when you add in the fact that he's only played 1 year of high school football. He didn't play as a freshman, sophomore, played back in the day, youth ball, but really last year was his first year out on a varsity level, playing at a top level. You have to be pretty encouraged with what you've seen. I mean, I believe it was like 4 or 6 interceptions, somewhere in that ballpark. Took 2 back for touchdowns. I mean, really good, decisive read on the ball, and, makes good breaks, and, just has kind of a really good knack for, knowing, how to attack the point, right? So I think Penn State's really happy, will be really happy if they can get this one over the line. When exactly it's going to happen, I'm trying to still kind of sort that out, but I do think we could see something this weekend. He did say he's not going to take any more official visits, which I think he was set to go to Arkansas and Iowa. Sounds like that's not going to take place. Penn State seems to be right there. Louisville was the other team he took an official visit to. So I think Penn State's in the driver's seat with this one. Still trying to get a feel for when it actually may take place. But I feel I'd be surprised if this drags into, this time next week, put it that way.
Ryan, reading the tea leaves there in terms of the visits and those that are happening and not happening. Ryan, I don't even know if you drink tea, let alone loose leaf tea, to read any tea leaves. But Fitz, what are your thoughts other than you hated that transition?
I hated that joke.
What? Well, sometimes they come to you in the moment and they don't work. I thought it worked, but Fitz, what do you think about Josh Johnson's situation with Penn State?
Yeah, Josh makes a lot of sense for Penn State. He's one of those guys that they find early that's got that size, got that length that you really covet at that position now. And, he's a bit raw. It kind of reminds me of Amani Oruwari, like a guy that just is raw, but you can see some of that coming together, especially in his junior film, able to find the football and do some nice things there. Is he a corner long-term? Ryan and I have had this discussion. Penn State thinks he's a corner. Penn State thinks he runs well enough. And I believe he's got some sprinting genes in his family to go with. But yeah, I think he's a guy that also gives you a little bit of versatility back there, maybe a potential safety in the long run. But they're happy to be in the position that they are with Josh Johnson. He's been a guy that they've looked at for a long time. Again, there's an element of rawness to this, but there's been some guys in this class that you look at and you say, that guy's probably not going to move much in the rankings. I think Josh Johnson is one of those guys that's going to be trending up at some point.
6'2" and vicious tackler. It's hard not to think safety. But, right. That's the conversation, I think, when you talk about some of these guys that have that versatility, is it provides you the flexibility in class that you're looking for. Fitz, let's move on. I think you put in an RPM for a different player. So who's the next future Nittany Lion, in your opinion?
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's the next, because he still wants to visit Maryland next weekend, the 21st. But Jeff Exner from McDonough. And this is not a layup. This is not a McDonough pipeline. He's definitely going to Penn State because he's from McDonough. But I think Penn State did enough on the visit to solidify themselves and build that lead pretty sizably. Virginia Tech made him think. Maryland has been talking a lot of him to sort of get him unsettled about Penn State. And coming into last weekend, he had questions. He had questions about how they were going to use him. It was a big theme for him. And it actually was really funny. The first thing he said to me was, yeah, they told me I'm not going to play H-back. They don't have an H-back, which was, something he heard from elsewhere, because he is 6'1.5", 6'2", 217. And he's a thicker kid than we're used to seeing for a receiver prospect. But we talked about the athleticism on the show before. Got a 4.3 shuttle a couple weeks ago at the Under Armour camp, which is really good for those official times. Yep. Especially when, like I said, he was the third or fourth fastest wide receiver, and he was 6'1.5", 6'2", 217, where the first three were like 5'8", 135. Like that's moving for a guy that's that size. So straight line speed is kind of what it is. I think he ran a 4.58, or I might have that mixed up with somebody else.
It was like a 4.6. It was right about like low 4.6, high 4.5. Yeah.
Who was 4.58? We just talked about a kid with a 4.58. But anyway,
Sure.
sorry, that's how my brain works. But Exenor, a physical receiver, a guy that I think can fit in this class, and I think can complement. We talked about receivers not necessarily needing to complement one another, but it's nice when they work out like that. So I'm interested to see how this one goes. I still think he's going to visit Maryland. Not 100% sure he's going to visit Maryland, but I still think Penn State's set themselves up for success with Jeff Exenor.
So the compliment that we'll focus on here, maybe not as the size, talking about Lex Cyrus and the projection and you guys' prediction that he'll end up at Penn State as well, but the speed, the combination of maybe a high ceiling prospect and using very general terms here, and then a guy who has a high floor in Jeff Exeter in terms of he's already big, he's already doing a bunch of different things. Is there still room to grow in a holistic sense for Jeff Exeter? And then very literally, is there room for him to get faster, to grow as an athlete, to kind of have a well-rounded profile instead of maybe profiling as a possession receiver and maybe not having that well-rounded profile? I guess, where do you land on his potential at Penn State?
Yeah, spiritually, I think he's great. I think he's got room to improve. It's been a really funny recruitment to follow because Ryan and I, when he got on the scene as a freshman, it was, okay, this guy's probably going to be a tight end, might be an edge rusher. Like, we're not sure how his body's going to change, how he's going to grow.
Yeah.
But he seems to have filled out into a receiver. I don't think it's the situation where, he's going to be 230 pounds in the strength program in a year. I think he's probably about where he's going to play in the college game as far as weight goes. So I'm not too concerned about that. He's got good body control, goes up and gets the football. So, and like I mentioned, T. Frank, on our show last week, I like how he carries himself, and there's something to be said for that. And I think that that's something that, when you take a big group of kids, not all of them are going to be at the maturity level that you want them to be. And we saw that with the 2022 class. And, maybe this class is one that can, sort of fix that.
This from Mech Engineer in the chat. I don't know that you guys can answer this question, but we're in the season where a lot of this is going to be determined. I'm trying to prep you for this class. This question: is this class going to finish in the top 20, let alone the top 12 or 15? There is a sense of, we just talked about Josh Johnson, and albeit I think all three of us think he's a better prospect than his current rating. Jeff Exeter, he's an 88 in the on3 profile. Where do you guys see this shaking out if things go well, and then the realistic path forward? I guess just answer his question, Ryan. What do you think about the projection of where this lands?
I feel like top 20 is definitely doable. Right now, they're number 14 in the country, and there's a lot of four-star talent still out there. A lot of it will come down to, guys like Beckham Kritza and how he performs at Miami Central this year. If he takes the kind of steps and shows the progression that Penn State thinks he can, well, he's going to move up because he's playing top competition this year in Florida. So guys like that, I think will have a big determination on where exactly Penn State finishes. They got to get Exeter over the line. They got to get Cyrus over the line. These are all guys who hold four-star rankings in the industry rankings. So, I do feel like top 20 is certainly doable. We'll see where things go. I mean, Rutgers right now is number 20 in on3's industry rankings. And obviously, Rutgers has added a lot of talent in recent months, but Penn State should absolutely be finishing above Rutgers. I think a big thing that'll kind of determine that really, though, is when you look at teams that Penn State's above right now, like Florida State, they have 4 commits. Michigan has 6 commits. Miami has 7 commits. Missouri 9. Those schools are obviously going to keep continuing to grow. But the way the way the on3's rankings work, of course, is right now we're only counting the top 9 or 10 guys, I believe it is, and those schools will obviously stack in lower ranked guys that Penn State kind of already has on their board. So there's a lot to be determined. The Penn State's still going to add probably another 10 guys to this class, but I mean I'd be pretty surprised if it's 21, 22, 23 for Penn State when it's all said and done, because I do feel like, again, go back to Josh Johnson, there are guys in this class that everybody doesn't know maybe how good of an athlete they are at this point. And that's where senior season film, will really help them kind of move up the board.
Ryan, it's an interesting position we always find ourselves in of saying, hey, recruiting rankings are valuable. And then we go, not all. This is not the story is not complete yet, so don't rely too much on the recruiting rankings for your feelings about Penn State football in this recruiting class. Fitz, I guess just the same question to you for Mech Engineer. How do you see this shaking out?
Yep, right around 16, 17 is where I expect. It's been a cycle where you've got a bunch of those body blows, but I think they'll be okay in the long run. Like I said, when they go on this run of wide receivers that we think that they're going to go on, that's going to boost it up. I mean, you've got a couple of 4-star industry guys in there. That's going to help it. Ryan, you're better versed in this. Can you explain the On3 team rankings as compared to other team rankings that other people may know about or may have followed?
I mean, look, it's pretty simple. I mean, Rivals has and Sean, is 24/7 pretty much a point system as well? Like where the more commits you get, the higher you are. Right. So
yeah, it's like top 20 in your class. And yeah,
this was something that, man, when we were still at Rivals, I complained about a lot. And I love the way On3 does it because, again, we're trying to project where they're going to finish, not just because they have 20 commits right now. I understand the point system, and this is where they stand at this moment. But at the end of the day, I mean, Rutgers right now is number 5 in Rivals' ratings. Like Rutgers is not going to finish 5th in the country. We all know that's not the case. So I think I love the way On3 does it. Right. I mean, again, right now I think we're only counting. What is it? Is it 9, 10? 10 is the number now as schools continue to add. It's basically the average of how many Power 5 schools, how many commits Power 5 schools have at the moment, which is why that number is 10. And as guys continue to grow or as classes continue to stack, that number climbs up 11, 12, 15, 16, up until we get to the 20s. So, because of that, Penn State does have some guys lower on the board right now or lower rating wise that aren't counted, that will be counted down the road. But you got to remember that so many other schools are going to add those players as well. And I think Penn State's actually in a position where, I could see them adding guys down the road that are higher ranked than some of their current commits. So yeah, time will tell. There's a long way to go, but, if Penn State doesn't finish top 20, I'd be really surprised.
And if I think the On3 rankings give a little bit of better sense of how that's going to finish more so than how it looks right now, right. Because I think the volatility there is not going to happen as much. You look at them at 14, they were 16 last year, and Penn State's always in that 12 to 16 range. And I feel like regression is going to come back to the mean, and you're going to find yourself in that situation again this cycle.
Hey, real quick before we move on, can I add something on Jeff Exner? Before we move on, so when we were at that Under Armour camp, man, I saw him up close before he ever was testing or anything like that. And I was like, wow, Jeff's getting big. And I certainly wondered, man, is he getting too big for this position? But the thing that pops about Jeff Exner isn't about straight line speed or anything like that. It's his explosiveness off the line of scrimmage. And I don't know, sometimes you don't always necessarily see that in film, but up close and certainly in testing numbers, we saw that. I mean, I was looking today at some of that stuff and a 10 plus broad and a 30 plus triple. I don't know if fans kind of understand those numbers, but just for comparison's sake, Pitt just got a commit the other day from Good Counsel's Damarian Folks. Okay, Jeff Exner had better explosive numbers and better 40 time than a player right now who's 5'10", 175. And this is a guy who, he's pretty much 6'2" now. We have him at 6'1.5", but he's pretty much 6'2" at this point, 217, like we were saying. So just his explosiveness, his able to burst off the line of scrimmage, that's where Penn State's really going to be able to maximize him. Sure, I don't know if he has the straight line speed to burn Ohio State's corners and things like that, but if you got a physical guy that you can use on slant routes and different things across the middle or whatever it may be,
there's more than one way to win as a receiver.
The more
you'd love to have the complete package, but as we've talked about and why receiver recruiting is so hard, you don't know which combination of skills are going to translate to success on the field. And ultimately, success and production, those are the things that matter. And your recruiting ranking doesn't always reflect that if you're a receiver, or, generally there's always an outlier at every position. Fitz, I want to get to this coming up next because there's a big caveat to all of this receiver talk, which is, what if you get a gigantic tight end who moves like a receiver and you stack him next to another gigantic tight end who moves like a receiver? It's official visit weekend. So we're going to be taking a look at the 4 players that are not committed to Penn State that are coming this week. A little bit shorter of a list today, a little bit more truncated because, as these guys mentioned, it is the committed players weekend where they all come in and celebrate the fact that they're all committed together. And then maybe you give a nudge to hey, you could be a part of the party here, Andrew Olesh. So let's start with the top Pennsylvania commit. who is uncommitted in this particular cycle. Can you set the stage for us, Fitz, on his recruiting so far?
This is one that Penn State was in on early. It's one of those guys I talked about earlier in the week on the show. But Penn State was in on it early. They had him for camp a couple of times last year. He, to his credit, came back and he worked into to getting that offer. Had a good junior season, and then he blew up. Penn State was the launching pad. So it's a situation where everything came at once for Andrew Olish. Alabama, Florida, Michigan, and that list was much bigger. So I think that this is one that maybe as time has gone by, Penn State has faded a little bit. Michigan is the school that I hear the most with him. He went to Florida last weekend. It was Alabama the weekend before. And he's really exploring all these options. Wants to play early, which I think is probably a strike against Penn State's tight end room, considering what they have in there. Be interesting to see if that will happen wherever he goes. So it's going to be one that Penn State has to make up that ground. And can they do it? Yes, absolutely. They've got Ty Howell. They've got the tight end pedigree to make it work. But still, this is not a layup for a top 5 in-state player.
Ryan, what are your thoughts on the situation? I just think that that's a very interesting dynamic that playing early factors in with a guy who how realistic is for a tight end to play early in his career, and what does early even mean? Does it mean as a freshman, as a sophomore? What are the parameters of that?
I'd have to look at Michigan's board or Michigan's depth chart to give you a better answer, because I think that's what it's going to come down to. I think it does kind of feel like Penn State, Michigan. Alabama's certainly in there too, though. But actually, did you go to Florida? Was it Florida?
Yeah, he was at Florida this past weekend.
Yeah. Look, it's hard for me to say. I don't know what their depth charts are like and what those coaches are telling him. But I do feel like, man, this one reminds me a lot of Michael Carroll in a lot of ways, and from a perspective of is he looking for reasons not to go to Penn State, because it all lined up pretty well in the beginning, right? Family ties to Penn State, a lot of things there that make a lot of sense. But man, I just right now it feels like Michigan's the team to beat, and they're going to have that final visit next weekend. That's going to make it tough for Penn State. So they added Matt Henderson for a reason, because they know he's an excellent talent. Of course, they want Andrew, of course, right. But it's a situation where, man, I don't really feel great about it right now, if I'm being blunt about it, and that's not really what I expected 3 months ago. But if you had told me that Michael Carroll was going to go to Alabama when we were watching him at camp this time last year,
right?
Yeah, I would have been shocked as well, because that felt like, boom, he's going to get that Penn State offer, and everything's going to snowball in Penn State's favor eventually, and that's not really how it played out. So time will tell on this one, man. But right now, I don't have a great feeling for Andrew Olish. I think he's going to end up at Michigan, honestly.
I want to get back to that particular conversation of maybe things that could help with Penn State, kind of centering on Andy Kotelnicki and his offense. But Fitz, this is always more of a perception thing than a reality thing. But looking at this here, Matt Zollers goes to Missouri. Zahir Mathis, Ohio State, I believe. Michael Carroll, Alabama. Alex Tash, Penn State. These are the top 5 players in Pennsylvania. And dominate the state aside. Just getting the best players in your state or in your region. Is this a real concern, or is this this cycle is unique because you had guys that blew up to a certain level that it becomes difficult to recruit nationally when it becomes a national? What's your perception of Penn State's success or failure within their own state this cycle?
A couple things at play here. There are guys on the actually 4 or maybe all 5 of those guys on the list. Penn State recruited the right way. They got in early. They didn't drag their feet. They were, sort of all in from the start. Zahir Mathis is kind of on the line, but he's known Dion since he was in middle school. So they were in on it there. So it wasn't a situation on the approach, I don't think. But they were in early on these guys, but kind of faded. That's been a theme at times, but I think more so in this NIL era, it's become a hindrance for Penn State. If you look at Penn State's class of 2024, Penn State's class of 2025, I think it's pretty indicative of where they're at from an NIL perspective. And
Mhm.
I think this one hits these top 5 in Pennsylvania. I think that hits right along with that theme.
So
Yeah,
that's
for sure.
that's the biggest storm cloud we've talked about heading into the future, forever. How long the NIL era lasts. This is because it feels like that this class. Not only that, I think some of the early commitments, Penn State saw this coming, and you see some of the players that you might go, I don't understand them getting X player so early. It feels like we want to make sure we get guys that are going to stay committed, that we think are valuable, good football players. Let's start there, but also are not NIL flight risks or as high of a risk in that situation. Ryan, is that a fair assessment of that? And is that a reality that you feel like is going forward for Penn State?
I don't know. I mean, I think from the outside looking in, that probably looks that way. I don't know enough about, some of these guys to know what they were wanting, what they were asking for when they committed. I mean,
Okay.
On the outside looking in, though, I do think it's a fair assumption to make. It's hard for me to sit here and say, Tyke Hayes doesn't want this, or Beckham Crisholm doesn't want that, and Andrew Olish does want this, or Michael Carroll does want that. It's just that whole, we talk about NIL so much, but here's the reality is no one really talks about the details of it publicly. I mean, you get them occasionally for a couple guys, but so many of those details just stay under the radar or below ground, however you want to put it. And that's why I'm always just hesitant to throw names at this or that and whomever, because it's just kind of a not fair assumption to make. You just don't know.
Gotcha. Fitz, do you have a thought on that?
But the competition is different there. Like the competition is different for Tyke Hayes and Beckham Critza than it is for Michael Carroll, who's committed to Alabama. Missouri has obviously come on as a power in this era, so like you've got that going. So it's tough,
and those
man.
are all great points. Yeah.
And I think it is about the competition there. I mean, Zahir Mathis is going to Ohio State. Like, would he go to Ohio State in the non-NIL era? Probably. Like, but still, like those are much more difficult recruitments to win to begin with, and then you throw in that extra wrinkle.
For sure.
Let's get to some of the other players with Andrew Olesh and that situation. Obviously, however that plays out is going to be a big part of this weekend in particular, but he's not the only player. So Fitz, who's somebody else you're interested in this weekend that you have your eye on among the 4?
Well, Penn State's corner recruiting, very interesting, especially with Darius Dixon hopping on board sort of out of nowhere. I mean, we talk about maybe that guy from out of nowhere as a receiver with a Corey Sims or Phillip Bell or something like that. I mean, Dixon was that guy in the corner. And now you're like, hey, how did they handle their top targets in Jameer Joseph and Brandon Finney? If you're going to take Josh Johnson, but they're still going to go after Jameer Joseph. Big time target for them, has been at or near the top of the board since the start. I argue internally of, is Brandon Finney number 1? Is Jameer Joseph number 1? Doesn't matter. You got to take them both if you can take them. So that's where you're at with him. I think he's a big time visitor this weekend. Went to Notre Dame this weekend. Sorry, I'm holding back a burp, and it's not looking good or sounding good on my end. No, Joseph is a guy that I've liked for a long, long time, and I think Penn State.
Take a water.
I think it fits for Penn State to eventually land him, but I don't think he's close to a decision.
Ryan, I apologize. There are no current updated highlights on Jameer Joseph, which for a top receiver or top player in Penn State's rankings is kind of rare. Do you have any other thoughts on Jameer Joseph, or do you want to go to one of the other guys that we have?
Lots of thoughts on Jameer Joseph. So a couple things here. One, Jameer's a quieter guy, so that always has kind of made it hard to track down details. Now, with that said, I do feel like, from talking to enough people about him over the last week or so, that Penn State, Notre Dame feel like the top 2 here. He's going to go to South Carolina. I do feel like that visit will take place. I'd be kind of surprised if he committed this weekend. He also went to Stanford as well. But at the end of the day, I feel like this should be Penn State or Notre Dame. So here's what's interesting with Jameer to me is, okay, Notre Dame already has 21 commits, 3 of whom are going to play cornerback. From talking around, I mean, the plan was for 3 corners. Now, with 21 commits, there's 2 guys that maybe could impact each other here, and that's Jameer Joseph and Jadon Blair, because they really want, Notre Dame, from what I understand, wants another safety. Like that's ideally what they'd like to add. I get them to 22 commits. I assume a couple of those other spots are probably earmarked for other positions. So we know Jadon Blair is going to come in on July 5th. We know Jameer Joseph, or expect Jameer Joseph to take another official visit next week in South Carolina. And then here we are going to be at the end of June, maybe the early July, and those 2 who we believe Blair's leaning towards Notre Dame, could have a real impact on each other. So let's see where things go. I just think that's an intriguing kind of storyline to watch about how, because we know Penn State's in the mix with Jadon Blair too, as is Michigan. How do those two, maybe Penn State will take both to clarify as well, but how do those two, especially if one of them ends up at Notre Dame, how could that impact the other? So keep an eye on that with Notre Dame being at 21 commits. I would also just add that of the 4 guys coming this weekend, I feel best about Jameer Joseph as far as ending up at Penn State. But, I also, again, had no idea Darius Dixon was going to commit last week.
Like we said, it's a good position to be in. Fitz, does this kind of push the needle, like we talked about with receivers, of now you got to jump into the class or else you might not be getting a spot in your school of preference? Or does all the options that a guy like that he has, does that give him the opportunity to say, I'm not going to be pressured, if you're talking about Jameer Joseph, into joining a class earlier than I want?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of both of that, because Penn State staff will use that, say they get Josh Johnson before the weekend or something like that, then, hey, guys, we gotta move along here if you can. Joseph is interesting to me because from what I gather, he doesn't talk a lot, and that's not just to the media, that's also coaches. Like, there's been schools that have almost stopped recruiting him because he just didn't call him back, and good schools, like really good programs. That said, I don't know that he's the personality to be pushed into that. So I think I'm not saying it could backfire on you, but it could be a situation where you could push him and he's just like, I'm good. Like, I'll figure it out. And because that's kind of how he's approached his entire recruitment. He was so focused on basketball that, I wrote that he visited for a game in September. I forget if it was the first one or the second one. But he visited for that game. And I was like, oh, where has he gone since then? I'm just looking, I'm just like, nowhere. He hasn't been anywhere. So, I don't know that that's the situation where he's been, like, there's a lot of these guys we consider well-traveled. Jameer Joseph's really not that guy, but I think he's a fit. You talk to people around that program, which is a great program in North Jersey that Penn State's had success with, as opposed to the Bergen Catholics and as opposed to a lot of the schools up, the private schools up there. So, I mean, there are things that point in Penn State's direction there.
Let me just add real quick. I mean, his last visit to Penn State was that West Virginia game, as you said, Sean, early September. He did take 2 other visits earlier as well. His official visit to Notre Dame was his only visit to Notre Dame as well. So, I just think that some of those things are important, but it's the NIL era, so who knows? But I do. The thing to stress, though, is like Penn State will take him whenever. Jadon Blair, whenever, right? They only have 14 commits right now, where Notre Dame's in a little bit of a position where they got to be a little pickier. And I do just wonder how much that'll impact things, especially with Notre Dame already having 3 really good cornerbacks already committed.
So I want to move on to my favorite player, and I've already stated this publicly. My favorite player to watch on film. Maybe Brandon Finney will sneak over top of that, but Taz Williams, one of the other uncommitted players. What do you guys feel about this particular recruitment? What do you feel about the jockeying for those wide receiver spots, Ryan, in this class, and with Taz Williams coming in this weekend?
Originally a Pittsburgh guy, grew up in Pittsburgh, ton of family ties to Pittsburgh. Mom still lives there. He's back in the summer a lot. I saw him 2 years ago at the Evolve camp, and he was already living down in Texas then, but he came up to, for the summer, a couple weeks, and continues to train with a lot of those guys. He knows Tamir Robinson, he knows Quentin Martin, he knows Lamont Payne, guys that, kind of, of course he's a couple years younger, but, he's known, since youth ball. So that's always a positive, especially when you're talking about a player who on his profile says he's from Red Oak, Texas. With that said, I also kind of feel like, I kind of think he's Texas A&M's to lose if A&M wants him. And Michigan's also very much in the mix as well. I kind of would put Penn State maybe 3rd right now. He did take an Ohio State official visit. I'm not sure how hard Ohio State's pushing for him at the moment, but to me, this feels like if Texas A&M really wants him, I think there's a good chance he ends up there. And then probably I'd have Michigan a little bit above Penn State at the moment. But this official visit will be massively important, as they always are. Let's see if Penn State's able to make some progress there. He's only visited Penn State one time earlier this year. That was it. Despite those, like I said, despite those ties, time will tell on this one. But like, I could point to 3 or I think Corey Sims is more realistic than Taz Williams, if I'm being honest.
Fitz, your thoughts on Taz Williams and the situation?
Good player. We talked about this on the show last week. He kind of does everything right. I don't know if he's like elite at anything, but really, really good at everything. He goes up, makes the plays. But putting that aside, I mean, despite his Pittsburgh roots, I would consider him a Texas kid at this point. So got to be one of those guys that you find in the margins. And I think if you look at the recruitment, Texas is not there. Texas A&M is there. Just I agree with Ryan that like if he gets that opportunity that close to home, like big time opportunity, which Texas A&M for all their shortcomings is a really big time opportunity. I think that's going to be tough to come away from. SMU is also in it. I think probably more than people would give credit. SMU is, I'm not going to call them a sleeping giant, but like they're going to surprise some people at some point. Mm-hmm. And there's a level of investment there that used to be there and then went away for some reason. No, I think that they're in it as well. Michigan, of course, looming as in that list as well. So I would agree with Ryan that this is another guy that they've got work to do. But I think they're appealing to him. Like the fact that he kind of wasn't talking about them and then all of a sudden set up an official visit. I think there's something to that. I think he's interested. It's just a matter of that they've got work to do there.
How much, and this is kind of, I'll fold this back in because I didn't bring it up on the Andrew Olish conversation like I said I was going to, but with these receivers and these tight ends, Andy Kotelnicki and the promise of an offense that is much more explosive, and I feel like it'd be very good for both of the players we're talking about here in terms of we think that Taz Williams is a B+ at everything, maybe an A- or an A+ with his hands and his route running. If you got a guy that can scheme you open and then you can take advantage of because you are so good from a positional standpoint, does any of that matter until they show it on the field? Or is there an opportunity for any of this to come back around if those things, kind of play out later in the season?
Yeah,
Fitz, what do you think?
I think it's possible, but I wouldn't lean on that right now. Like I think that's a hope thing, and with what you're looking at with numbers and stuff like that, I just it happens, but it doesn't happen all that often.
That's situation counting your ifs. If this, if that, then once you get past one or two, probably not going to happen. A guy that I think is a super interesting, maybe a wild card this weekend, Randy Adarica. Ryan, what do you know about Randy Adarica?
Certainly the wild card of the week, but the wild card of the week last week then committed 2 days later. So yeah, right. That's where I'll start with that, right? I mean, everyone's been leaning towards Miami for him for a long time. He came up for the blue-white game. Obviously, great start. Set the table for them to get an official visit. He's playing with Beckham Kritza now. Those ties, obviously, Beckham will be here this weekend. That's important to note. But yeah, I said this last week. I believe it when I see it with California kids. It's kind of the same with those Miami Central kids, and a lot of those. Yes, Penn State does pluck guys from down south, like 1 or 2 a year. But I just don't know, like talent-wise and all that. Yeah, he fits really well. I just don't know if Penn State's what fits Randy, if that makes sense. On the field, yeah, certainly. I mean, 16 tackles for loss last year, 11 sacks. I mean, he's a very productive player. I don't see these kind of guys coming to Penn State very often. But it's kind of felt like that all year with defensive line because, man, that is a difficult board and one that I still think is going to, if any position is going to drag into the season, it's going to be defensive line. So not trying to be negative or whatever it may be. I don't sound very optimistic. It's because I'm not very optimistic with this one. I'd still lean towards him staying down south somewhere, although I do believe, did he take a USC official?
He took a USC official, and they're in it as well. It's also a situation where if Penn State lands this guy in the summer, is he in the class in December? I don't know. Mm-hmm. you got the South Florida factor there.
Ryan, you and the chat are both on a negative tone today in terms of
what
we're
this weekend, though.
Here.
Yeah, I mean, again, like Jameer Joseph's the one that I feel good about, and I thought Andrew Olish would be that guy at one point, but now I really don't. Like I said, I feel like he's kind of looking for reasons not going to Penn State's not the right way to put it, but just when it comes to what he's looking for, and then I look at Penn State, it doesn't really add up, honestly. So, Taz Williams, I don't know. I don't feel very optimistic about him either. So Jameer's the guy I have circled. Do I think he's going to commit this weekend, though? No, not really. I think it will be kind of a quiet weekend from that perspective. And then next weekend's the one that's shaping up to be fun or wild because I feel like you can see a lot of guys drop off, maybe some guys added. That's kind of the one to follow. And then, of course, we're going to get into late June, July, and all hell will break loose with guys popping all over the place.
Well, we'll get into that next week. We can only handle so much of that right now, but there is more to talk about. There's a 7-on-7 passing camp tomorrow, and of course, we got to review what happened last week during Penn State Prospect Camp. Are they going to find the next Nittany Lion for 2026 and beyond? So all three of us were at Penn State Prospect Camp this past weekend, and it was talk about the first one, there being so many players. I think there were double the amount of players at this past camp, with a lot of good players. Like, I said this in my article that I wrote on Monday about players that stood out. I had to make two lists because there were so many on the defensive line and so many, at least that I observed with the cornerbacks specifically and the safeties. But I know that you guys were also there looking at some players. So let's go through the guys that stood out to you. And Fitz, I'll lead to you. Who were the players that you noticed and that you think are stories coming out of last weekend's prospect camp?
Yeah, we talked about this one earlier this week, but Peyton Falzone from Nazareth picked up an offer. He's a high school quarterback. He's not going to play quarterback at Penn State. Going to be a tight end guy that came out 6'5", ran a 4.5. So he's fitting into that testing zone that you see with Luke Reynolds, with Andrew Olish, just another one of those big freaking guys that can run and test it off the charts. So encouraging to see that, especially for an in-state kid. Penn State, offered right away, and I think that they're in a position where that's one that we're going to be watching for a long time, because the numbers match up with what they see. They had him run some routes for Brady Edmonds, the quarterback that was in from California, 2027 quarterback, and he looked like he could carry himself as an eventual tight end at 250 pounds, something like that.
Ryan, what about you? Who did you talk to afterwards, or who stood out to you in terms of testing and reaction afterwards?
Caden Gephardt, I think we got to mention 2026. He's listed as a safety at 0-3, but Penn State's going to recruit him as a linebacker, from what I understand. Another guy, Olatanji, who, of course, Penn State went there last year, got Ethan Grunkmeyer. He seems to be the next top guy coming up through the ranks there. So ran a 4.5, at just under 200 pounds, and obviously he still has 2 years to go to grow and progress. We'll see where Penn State's linebacker board goes for next year. But, I think from a testing perspective, everything kind of stacked up well for Caden down the road. And then I would also add Jaziel Hart to that too. Another player out of Virginia, Roanoke area, basically 6 foot 170 cornerback prospect, who I believe he had the best broad jump of the entire camp, if I'm not mistaken, or at least that's what I was told. So another guy to watch. Again, another 2026 prospect who I thought camped pretty well, held his own, definitely held his own in individual drills. He was the guy who kind of popped to me the most while watching those guys for, I don't know, about 20 minutes or so. So I think he's a quality prospect, guy who's going to keep moving up. Not really rankings wise, but he's not rated yet. But as far as offers and stuff like that, North Carolina, West Virginia, South Carolina, Tennessee, a couple of schools to make early moves there. But I think he'll end up being a guy we're talking about down the road. He's already been to Penn State 3 times, by the way. Camp last year, and then came up for that mid-May junior day. So 3 early visits are positive, 2 camps especially to get in front of Penn State's coaches. All that's positive there. So let's see where things go. Caden Gephardt, by the way, was also at a spring practice, so that was his second trip, at least that I know of. So 2 guys that seem pretty interested in Penn State. Of course, Grunk's here. That'll only help with Gephardt. They're pretty, he made it clear they're pretty good friends. So see where things go.
Fitz, next up for you.
Damari Simeon, defensive lineman from St. Augustine Prep. Obviously, Penn State's been active there in the past, from South Jersey. He was really good.
I loved him.
He didn't look 6'2". He measured out at 6'2", so that's a good sign. But he was very active in those defensive line drills and the 1-on-1s. Was very good as well. So was encouraged to see that. It's kind of got that burst that you like to see from a young defensive lineman. And in the size, I think will come. So I think that's a guy that we'll be watching for a while here.
I think he came in too, he wasn't like it was 240 or anything. I think he was in the 270s. So to me, he just looked exactly like a Penn State defensive tackle.
Right.
Maybe not the tallest guy in the world. There were other guys that looked like they would be pure one techs, big, strong guys. And then when they started moving, Damari Simeon kind of flashed in front of everybody. I spent a good amount of time with defensive ends and defensive line going through drills, and that fluidity, and Fitz mentioned that burst coming off the line of scrimmage was really, really impressive. Is there anybody else, Ryan? I'll come back to you. That stood out to you.
Yeah, I mean, look, they did hand out a 2028 Jackson Vaughn. I think was he the 8th grader that they offered too? We'll keep an eye on him. He camped as an edge, right? 6'3", 220. I believe he camped as an edge, right?
Yes.
We have him listed as a linebacker on the profile. That just threw me off for a second. But I mean, the one thing I was stressed though, guys who didn't get offers, for example, they had a really good offensive line group in here. Max Hiller from Coatesville guys, he's going to be really good. I don't know about Kevin Brown good or Tyler Merrill as far as top 50 kind of guys, but this is a prospect who I think should absolutely is going to be considered for a 4-star rating. I think that's kind of fairly safe to say. Penn State was the first school to offer him. He's been up a couple times now. This is a guy I think we're going to be talking about a good bit. Carter Scruggs was up as well. Carter already is top 200 or so in the on-3 ratings. He's going to be, I think, one of the region's more coveted offensive line prospects for the 2026 class. And let me clarify, Max Hiller, by the way, is a 2027 prospect. I didn't clarify that, but I mean, I thought there was quite a bit of talent, especially offensive line that I think I focused on them more than anything. Brendan Alexander was there too, out of Western PA. He already holds a Penn State offer. Leighton Von Brandt is a 2027 guy who already is pretty much 6'6", 250, 260. There's a lot there to work and mold. So it was a really strong offensive line group. I thought that was the biggest takeaway. Who else am I missing? I do want to mention Zahir Cobb as well, safety prospect out of St. Albans, I believe, down Maryland, DC area. He looks like a pretty good prospect as well. Another guy Penn State's already offered, in somebody to keep an eye on for sure.
Fits that offensive defensive line matchup. We saw a couple of the highlights. I know you were there for the whole one-on-one portion. What stood out to you about that particular group of offensive and defensive linemen?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's with the younger guys. You've got the guys that Ryan mentioned. Sorry, I'm scrolling through my notes here. And it was a good group. I mean, Amari Hills was there, and I wish Amari Hills was more athletic because he's a good football player, and that's and it's unfortunately not close in terms of his athleticism. I think if he was on the line, I think he might be in the class by now. 2025 offensive lineman, probably a guard from the Baltimore area, but he's got work to do on that athleticism. They brought him back, I think, hopeful that he would improve on it. We'll see about that. Aiden O'Neill was in from New Jersey. Kid looks great. Long way to go as a prospect there as well. But it was a really good, really fun group to watch.
What were your thoughts on him specifically? Because I loved what I saw from him when he got off the bus, when his initial testing was great, and then when they started going through positional drills, the opposite happened of Damari Simeon, where he jumped out of, okay, this guy maybe he's unassuming, but he moves well, and O'Neill really struggled to bend. He couldn't get around the hoop in an efficient way. So is that something you think can be fixed? Is that something that you think he can develop into? Because again, 2027 guy, there's plenty of time at 6'4", 250. You really like that, but there's some things I think to work on. What are your thoughts on that projection? Yeah,
you can't lean on that because he does have time to get better in terms of bend, in terms of flexibility and things like that, because that'll certainly help him. But yeah, it was interesting to watch him go from, hey, this kid looks amazing, to I don't know that he's a national level guy that he looks like, so that makes sense. Yeah. So, but a lot of time to work there. All these kids have a lot of time to work, and that's what we forget sometimes.
Sam Greer kind of fit that mold too, by the way, who's already a top 200 player, but athletically, I thought there was a little bit to be desired. So anyway.
Yeah, no, you're right. There were a lot of names that we knew going into the camp, and then some of the other guys that stood out weren't at the top of the list. I don't think Carter Scruggs did a whole lot during the day for whatever reason. So the depth at those positions, I think, really stood out.
Hey, let's finish on a positive though. Brady Edmonds is going to be a stud. That guy can sling it. He left with an offer. He's 2027 Cali kid. Long way to go. He did say he wants to get back for a game, but he has the makings of being a top 5 quarterback, I think, in that class.
Fitz, did you get a chance to take a look at him? I was busy looking at the DBs and everybody else. I didn't really get a chance to see too much of the quarterbacks.
I watched him when he was throwing with Falzone, and that's pretty much all I saw, which wasn't an intensive workout, but you could tell just like it comes off his hand differently than a lot of the kids that were there.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of guys at the camp, but there's also stuff coming up. And Fitz, you wrote something I was just curious about because 2026, despite the fact that we're talking about 2025 right now, quarterback and what people are arguing and barking at each other in chat about is Penn State can't land top 5-star talent, difference-making talent at the quarterback position or otherwise. And 2026 is another opportunity to get a top quarterback, but the dominoes are falling. So you want to give a preview of what you wrote about at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for people to understand where things are setting up for the next class.
Yeah, the dominoes are beginning to tip. I wouldn't say completely falling yet. Florida got a guy last week. Notre Dame got Noah Grubbs a couple of weeks ago. So when you're looking at where Penn State stands in the hierarchy of recruiting quarterbacks, they're pretty high there. They're probably at the bottom of the pretty high group, but at the same time, you're tangling with Texas, Michigan. Clemson just came in and offered Brady Hart this weekend. Tennessee got a pick for Faison Brandon. So it's going to be tough, and not guaranteeing that Penn State's going to land one of these top guys, but they are certainly in the mix and they're getting them on campus, which is a big deal. Guys love Danny O'Brien. So wrote about that yesterday in terms of how those things are playing out, and Penn State's getting a top target on campus next week.
Last thing, and Ryan, I'll come to you on this one. A big 7-on-7 camp coming up tomorrow. So give us a preview of any interesting teams or any interesting names that you're going to be watching throughout the afternoon as they go through competition, which just what I heard from Google this morning, scattered thunderstorms are possible in the area. So we'll see what anything happens tomorrow in terms of this particular thing. They've been lucky that the weather has been pristine for all of these camps.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, nice. That aside, what do you think?
Harrisburg, Imhotep, right? I mean, those are kind of always the two that whenever they're there, they're going to have our attention. They're actually in the same group this year too, by the way. Penn State put Good Counsel, Harrisburg, Imhotep, and I think it was Woodbridge all in the same group, which is interesting because then when you look at some of the other groups, a lot of smaller schools, right? Like they clearly want to see these 4 schools, go at it, right? So I can't wait to kind of see that matchup and, see where things go, as far as the bracket rounds go then. But, Harrisburg's obviously stacked. We've talked about them a lot. Now they have Messiah Mickens and Deontay Sheffy, both running backs. Of course, Elias Koch and Kevin Brown. I mean, all 4 of those guys rate in the top in the 1-300, for 2026. They will be without Sean Lee, who is their 2025 quarterback. He's expected to take an official visit to Pitt this weekend, just was at Iowa State last weekend. So just kind of curious to see how maybe that impacts 7-on-7 and where things go. But, Imhotep then's coming in. I'm not sure if Zahir Mathis will be there or not. And I think Jabri Wallace-Coleman will be there. I'm not exactly sure. We know Jabri was taking an official visit a midweek to North Carolina. I believe he tweeted out earlier in the week. Right. So we'll see if the 2025 guys, what all they do. I think Charles Belzer, the linebacker prospect 2026, would be the guy to watch in that 2026 group. They've offered Jesse Moody and shown interest in Dylan Abram and Zaire Coleman, but I feel like Belzer's the one that Penn State's the most interested in. But I would also argue that it's maybe Imhotep's 2027 group with Kareem Hawk and was it Zyke Scott, I believe it is. Those are the guys I've just heard the most kind of feedback for, buzz on like, hey, these guys could end up being national prospects. So we'll see how those things progress. We expect Good Counsel to be there as well, as I mentioned earlier. But, Good Counsel is very senior heavy this year. Yeah, I think like 5 or 6 of their top guys are all 2026. You have Fahim Delane going to Ohio State, Gavin Crawford, Aiden Buchanan, both are going to West Virginia. You have Justin Thompson, Demarion Folks, who I mentioned earlier. They both just committed to Pitt. So it's I'm not sure how much Penn State will be watching, Good Counsel, for example, because so many 2025 guys. They have a couple. I think Anthony Sweeney's maybe has some potential as a 2027 edge. He showed some flashes at the Under Armour camp, but like I said, just 2026, Harrisburg, 2027, Imhotep. Like I could see the staff watching those guys quite a bit. Aside from that, though, I mean, there's a lot of prominent schools, but I wouldn't say there's a lot of guys that like absolutely flash for Penn State. Like, for example, Quince Orchard will be there, but we know Iverson Howard's going to take an official visit to Florida State. Aiden West is taking an official visit to Cincinnati. Rodney White maybe is somebody to watch as far as Concordia Prep. He has an early Penn State offer.
Brother plays for Quince Orchard too. So
yeah, there you go. That's a good point. Yeah. So we'll see. There's a lot of other prominent schools, but not a lot of guys that like, oh yeah, that they could probably end up at Penn State. So Imhotep, Harrisburg, that's where I'm going to have most of my focus throughout the day. Looking forward to seeing if any guys pop. There are a couple 7-on-7 teams that like I don't have the exact rosters for, and I got to try and sort out if there's a guy here or a guy there, and we'll work on that today.
Fitz, final thoughts? Anything interesting to say to you about tomorrow?
I'm excited. It's going to be a big camp, so there's going to be guys all over the place. I love to find the young guys that start standing out, and then the competition will bubble up to the top. So I'm excited about it.
And the best way to follow along is over at bluewhiteillustrated.com, because when we post our observations that go right on the Lions Den message board, we have a whole process. All three of us will be out there gathering our thoughts and information. Some of it gets to X, Twitter, some of it gets out there, but most of it, when we're talking about what we see and our evaluations, are all at bluewhiteillustrated.com. So subscribe, get on the board, have conversations with us, yell about 5-star talent on the message board, because there's people that feel the same way as you there, and you can all have a conversation about it, and we can talk about Penn State football together. I'm Thomas Frank Carr, Ryan Snyder, Sean Fitz, the experts, giving you all the good stuff on Penn State recruiting. We will be back with more information, and as we have said throughout the show, there's a lot of stuff happening. A lot of these dominoes are going to be falling 25 and 26, so subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the notifications so you don't miss any breaking news. We'll talk to you later.